It definitely raises some eyebrows when a former president, maybe thinking about running again, decides his first big international trip is to Saudi Arabia.
It does. And then almost right away, you hear this news about, well, a pretty substantial gift.
A $400 million jet, yeah. From Qatar, no less. It's something.
It certainly makes you question the usual diplomatic playbook. Normally, first trips, especially for a potential new term, are about shoring up ties with close allies.
Exactly. And that's really what our sources are digging into today. We're drawing from Stephen Colbert's commentary on The Late Show, some reporting from The Washington Post, CBS News, and also what Jordan Klepper over at The Daily Show had to say. So the mission for this DRM News Global podcast is, well, to unpack the potential reasons, the implications behind this trip, this jet, using what these commentators observed.
We're trying to look beyond just the headlines, right? What could be the motivations? What are the possible consequences?
Okay, so let's start with that Saudi trip. Colbert pointed out, and it's a fair point, that usually a president's first hop overseas is to, like, the UK or Canada, somewhere familiar.
Precisely. Those trips are often symbolic. They reaffirm long-standing relationships, signal stability in foreign policy.
But Colbert suggests, and he's referencing reports here, that Trump's pick, Saudi Arabia, seemed almost like well, he called it a highest bidder approach.
That's quite a framing.
Yeah, and he brought up Trump's own comment from March, saying Saudi Arabia put up $450 million during his last visit there. I mean, hearing that so directly, it's unusual in diplomacy, isn't it?
It definitely suggests a different lens on the relationship, maybe more transactional, focusing on specific financial inputs rather than just shared values or strategy.
Right. It moves away from the traditional alliance talk.
Completely.
And of course, Colbert being Colbert, he slipped into his Trump impression, joking about walking around with a big bag, looking for bribes, and asking, Qatar gave me a jet. Can you beat a jet?
The humor there really highlights a kind of public skepticism, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About whether these interactions are, let's say, standard diplomatic procedure.
It definitely lands that way. Okay, so let's talk about this jet. A $400 million plane, reportedly a gift from Qatar. Colbert, he didn't mince words, called it a clear bribe.
Strong language, yeah.
He even did this sarcastic applause, saying Trump keeps the nausea fresh. It's cutting, but it probably reflects how a lot of people reacted.
This certainly taps into significant public unease. Accepting a gift of that magnitude from a foreign government, especially for someone considering another run for office, it raises questions.
He had that joke about a slogan for a Qatari Air Force One. Yes, speak louder into the tray table. You can just picture it.
Oh, yeah.
But jokes aside, this plane is apparently going to be donated to Trump's presidential library eventually. Colbert quipped the only thing Trump will check out is the big plane. What about that angle? A huge gift earmarked for a library.
Well, it still creates an appearance issue, doesn't it? Even if it ends up at a library, it's a massive personal asset linked to a former leader, gifted by a foreign power. It raises questions about potential influence.
And this is where it gets, well, even more tangled. Colbert brought up Trump's own history with Qatar. Back in 2017, he accused them quite publicly of funding terrorism at a very high level.
I remember that, yeah.
But then, by 2018, a total reversal. Suddenly, Qatar is a very big advocate against terrorism. How do you square that circle?
It's shifts like that which fuel speculation, Was it a genuine change in geopolitical assessment or were other factors involved? And you have to remember the ongoing bipartisan criticism about Qatar's past links to funding Hamas. That adds another layer of complexity to accepting such a gift.
Exactly. So while all this is happening with Saudi Arabia and Qatar, Colbert also circled back to the very difficult issue of Jamal Khashoggi's murder.
A critical piece of context when you're evaluating these relationships. You can't really ignore it.
No. Colbert reminded folks that U.S. intelligence determined Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, ordered the killing and dismemberment of Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist.
A finding the U.S. government stood by.
And then Colbert played that clip of Trump talking about MBS, saying, I like him too much, that's why we give so much, too much. Given the Khashoggi context, how does that kind of statement land internationally?
It highlights that constant tension, doesn't it, between engaging diplomatically and upholding human rights values. For many observers, that kind of personal affinity expressed that way seemed to minimize the gravity of the Khashoggi situation.
Colbert's Trump impression again joked about MBS being like the son I never had, followed by a really dark line about dismemberment. He also touched on the lavish welcome Trump got, the sumptuous carpet, and even reports that Trump seemed to nod off during a meeting with MBS.
Those details, whether completely accurate or slightly embellished for comedic effect, paint a picture, don't they? A picture where maybe the ceremony, the personal rapport seem to take precedence over substantive policy discussions or airing difficult truths.
And it wasn't just Colbert focusing on this angle. Jordan Klepper on The Daily Show, he kind of cut right to the chase, suggested the whole trip was simply about corruption.
Klepper often takes that more direct, confrontational approach,
Oh?
raising the possibility of personal financial motives driving foreign interactions.
Yeah, he pointed to news reports mentioning Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump apparently having lucrative real estate deals, potentially cooking in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE. Klepper's punchline was pretty dark, hoping these countries could go back to funding terrorism instead. But the underlying point is clear for concern about potential conflicts of interest.
It definitely flags that potential blurring of lines, personal business versus national interest. It's an ethical minefield, potentially.
On a lighter note, just quickly, Colbert mentioned the timing. Trump's Saudi trip fell right on his own birthday. He joked Trump leaving the country was a nice birthday present.
Even the jokes sometimes reflect a certain undercurrent of public feeling about the former president's activities.
And one last point from Colbert, he noticed that even some commentators on Fox News were questioning Trump accepting the Qatari jet.
And that's often telling, isn't it? When criticism about something like this crosses the usual political divides, it suggests a broader concern that maybe an ethical line was approached or even crossed.
So as we wrap up this DRM News Global podcast, we're really left with some quite significant questions hanging in the air. Was that Saudi trip, was accepting that jet, primarily about, financial incentive?
Or potential future benefits.
Right. And what are the ethics of a former president, one who might run again, taking such a huge gift, especially given his own past harsh words about Qatar? And maybe zooming out, what does this all suggest about international relations today, about U.S. foreign policy?
These are really the core questions, aren't they? They push us to think about all the different pressures and motivations that can shape diplomacy and how personal interests might intersect with global affairs.
Thinking about all this commentary, it really makes you wonder, is this just how things work on the world stage now, a kind of transactional diplomacy, favors exchanged? Or should we be more concerned about the potential for foreign policy decisions to be shaped by personal gain? Definitely something to mull over as we watch how things unfold.